The year was 1887, and for Clara May Dawson, the world was nothing but a splintered bench and a wind that cut like glass. She'd been sitting there for 2 days. The train had come and gone, a puff of smoke vanishing down the tracks, taking with it the last of her hope. The man who was supposed to be here, the man her future was tied to, never showed. The letter in her pocket, promising a home and a husband, was now just a cruel joke. Worn, creased, and worthless. The townspeople of Silver Creek saw her. Oh, they saw her. They saw the faded dress, the thin shawl, the way she flinched when the wind blew too hard. They saw an orphan, a stray, a problem that wasn't theirs. Whispers followed her like shadows. Wrong bride. Must have been swindled. God help her. Clara lowered her eyes, her chin high. She'd spent her life in orphanages, learning to swallow sorrow and stand straight. But this was a new kind of cold, a cold that seeped into her bones and froze the very dream she had dared to have. A dream of a hearth, of belonging, of a place to finally stop running. The station was empty. Her stage was empty. She was alone. The first night, the station master locked the doors, leaving her outside. She curled up on the bench, her breath making small, ghost-like clouds in the frigid air. A stray dog, its ribs showing like the teeth of a saw, nosed its way toward her. She broke the last piece of bread from her satchel and let the animal eat from her palm. She could still give, even when everything had been taken. That small act was a tiny anchor in a sea of despair. The second day was worse. The town moved around her like she was invisible. Horses, wagons, men with hard eyes, women clutching their shawls tighter as they passed. She waited. Maybe he was delayed. Maybe there was a mistake. But the sun arced across the sky and plunged below the horizon, and the second night found her again, shivering on that same bench. Snow began to fall, softly at first, then thicker, like a shroud being lowered over the world. Her fingers were numb, her lips chapped. A hollow ache started in her belly. She was going to die here, on this bench, in this town that didn't want her, waiting for a man who never came. And that's when she heard it. A small voice, cutting through the swirling snow. "Daddy!" Clara looked up. A little girl, no more than 4 years old, was pointing a mitten straight at her. Golden braids bounced on her shoulders as she tugged on the coat of a tall, broad-shouldered man. "Daddy, it's her." The girl's voice was filled with a strange, tearful certainty. "The lady from my dream." Before the man could react, the girl broke free. She ran, arms outstretched, and launched herself into Clara's lap. She clung to her, her small body a sudden, shocking burst of warmth against Clara's frozen frame. The girl's sobs were loud in the quiet, snowy air, stopping the few remaining townsfolk in their tracks. "God answered us." The little girl wept into Clara's shoulder. "He sent her." Clara froze, bewildered. She tentatively wrapped her arms around the trembling child. The father stepped forward, his face a mask of grief and exhaustion, his eyes shadowed beneath the brim of his hat. He was Silas Callahan, a rancher who had buried his wife a year ago and was now raising his daughter alone. The whispers started again, sharp and ugly. "That orphan drifter, not fit for him." Silas ignored them. He bent down, his voice low and rough but steady. "Come," he said, not to the town but to Clara. "No one deserves the cold." He lifted his daughter, Rose, from her lap and offered Clara his other hand. Pride warred with desperation inside her, but the pleading in the little girl's eyes, the simple, quiet dignity in the man's offer, was too much. She placed her numb fingers in his. His grip was firm, not of pity, but of respect. He pulled her to her feet, and for the first time in 2 days, she wasn't alone. She was being led away from the station, away from the whispers, toward a future she could never have imagined. But as she walked beside him, She couldn't shake the little girl's words. The lady from my dream, it made no sense. And things that made no sense were often dangerous. The Callahan Ranch was a different world, a world of pine smoke, worn leather, and the lingering smell of baked bread. It was a home. For the first time in her life, Clara stepped into a place that felt like one. But she was a ghost here, an intruder in someone else's life, in someone else's grief. Rose followed her everywhere, chattering as if they were old friends, her belief in Clara absolute. Silas, however, kept his distance. He was a silent mountain of a man, his sorrow a wall she couldn't see past. He would nod when she mended a shirt, or watch her stir the stew, his face unreadable, but he never smiled. The town, however, had made up its mind about her. When she ventured in for supplies, the stares were like daggers. Mrs. Prudence Whitlock, the storekeeper's wife, a woman with eyes like chips of ice, would whisper just loud enough for Clara to hear. "Some folks will take in any stray." Another woman hissed, "She'll bring ruin. A woman plucked from the rails has no honor." Shame burned in her cheeks. She bore it in silence, her head bowed, her heart shrinking a little more each time. She tried to earn her place through work. She milked the cows before dawn, her hands cracking in the cold. She brushed the horses until their coats shone. She scrubbed floors and kneaded dough and sewed Rose a new doll from scraps of an old curtain. Every chore was a prayer, a plea. Let me be worthy. Let me stay. But every night as the wind howled outside the windows, doubt was her only companion. She was living in a dead woman's house, wearing a dead woman's apron, caring for a dead woman's child. Silas would look at her sometimes, and she knew he was seeing a ghost, but not hers. He was seeing his wife. She was just a placeholder, a temporary fix for his grief. Sooner or later, he would wake up from this strange dream and tell her to go. The thought was a constant aching pain in her chest. One evening, the weight of it all became too much. The sidelong glances in town, the back-breaking chores, the suffocating silence from Silas. She stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her thin shawl around her shoulders. The sky was a dark, endless velvet, and the snow was falling again, muffling the world in a soft, cold silence. Maybe it was time. Maybe she should leave before she was told to. Leave before the kindness ran out. Leave before she let her heart believe this could be real. She closed her eyes, the familiar loneliness of her entire life pressing down on her. A small voice cut through the quiet. "Don't go." Clara turned. Rose stood in the doorway, clutching a worn blanket, her blue eyes wide and shining with tears in the lantern light. The child took a small step forward, her voice a desperate whisper. "If you leave, I'll never dream again." The words struck Clara with the force of a physical blow. She stared at the little girl, at the fragile, fierce hope in her face. Unwanted at the station, rejected by the world, but here was one small heart that believed she was sent from heaven. And as she looked past the child, she saw him. Silas, standing in the shadowed doorway, his face impossible to read. But he was there. He had heard every word. And he didn't move. He just watched her, his silence a question she was terrified to answer. Clara stayed. Each day was like walking on a frozen lake, testing the ice with every step. Never sure if it would hold her weight. Rose was her anchor, her faith in Clara a bright, unwavering light. But Silas remained a mystery. He was no longer a stranger, but he wasn't family either. He was something in between, a space filled with unspoken words and lingering glances. The air between them crackled with a tension that had no name. She would catch him watching her as she braided Rose's hair, his expression a mixture of sorrow and something else, something softer, something that looked almost like hope. Winter tightened its grip, burying the ranch in silver sheets of snow. Clara learned the land not through words, but through feeling. She learned the sound the cattle made before a storm, the way the old barn door groaned in a high wind, the exact spot on Silas's leather gloves that needed mending before the cold split the skin. She worked without being asked, her diligence a quiet language she hoped he could understand. The town, however, continued to speak its own cruel language. The whispers didn't stop. They sharpened. Prudence Whitlock's scorn became a local pastime. "She's after his land," she'd mutter loudly at the mercantile as Clara measured out flour. "A snake finds a warm rock. That's all she is." One day, a young ranch hand spat on the ground near her feet. Clara just clutched her basket tighter, the fire of shame burning in her cheeks, and walked away. She returned to the ranch that evening, her spirit bruised. Silas was in the yard, tightening the harness on a wagon. The setting sun cast him in silhouette, making him look larger than life. She set the supplies in the kitchen and brought him a dipper of water. He took it, his eyes scanning her face, seeing the shadow that the town had left there. He said nothing, but as she turned to go, he reached out, and his hand covered hers on the wagon's rein. It wasn't a romantic gesture, it was a gesture of solidarity, of strength. His calloused fingers were a silent promise. "You are not alone in this." Then the storm came, not just a snowstorm, but a blizzard, a howling white monster that descended from the sky without warning. The wind screamed, rattling the windows in their frames and throwing snow against the house like handfuls of gravel. The world outside vanished into a churning vortex of white. The cattle, caught in the far pasture, bellowed in terror, their cries barely audible over the gale. Silas pulled on his heaviest coat, his jaw set like stone. He was going after them. It was a suicide mission. The drifts were already chest-high and climbing. Clara saw the raw fear in Rose's eyes as she watched her father prepare to walk into the abyss. And in that moment, Clara made a choice. She wasn't a guest anymore. She wasn't a stray. This was her home. These were her people. While Silas was in the barn, she wrapped herself in every layer of clothing she could find, tied her shawl tight over her hair, and plunged out the back door into the blizzard. The storm was a physical entity. It clawed at her face, stole the air from her lungs. She couldn't see more than 3 feet in front of her. She fought her way toward the pasture, half stumbling, half crawling through drifts that swallowed her whole. She found the cattle huddled against the fence, their eyes rolling white with panic. She screamed at them, waved her arms, her voice ripped away by the wind. She forced the heavy gate open, her muscles screaming in protest, and drove the terrified animals, one by one, toward the faint, dark shape of the barn. Her lungs burned, her limbs were numb, but she didn't stop until the last cow was safe inside. When she turned to go back to the house, her legs gave out. The world tilted, a dizzying nightmare of white on white. She fell to her knees, the biting cold instantly seeping through her clothes. Darkness bloomed at the edge of her vision, then strong arms wrapped around her, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Silas. His face, barely visible through the swirling snow, was a terrifying mask of fury and fear. "Fool woman," he growled, his voice rough as rock salt. But the arms holding her were gentle. He carried her back through the storm, his every step a battle against the wind, his body a shield protecting hers. Inside, Rose was crying. Silas laid Clara by the fire, pacing the room like a caged animal, his jaw tight, wrestling with words he couldn't find. Finally, as the feeling returned to her limbs in searing pins and needles, he knelt in front of her. "Don't you ever do that again," he said, his anger trembling. It wasn't anger at her, it was anger at the storm, at the world, at the thought of losing her. "If you were gone—" His voice broke. He couldn't finish. He stood abruptly, wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders, and turned his back to her, but the rigid set of his shoulders spoke volumes. He had almost lost her, and the realization had shaken him to his very core. The blizzard raged for 3 days. When it finally broke, the world was silent, buried, and beautiful. But a new trial arrived. Rose fell ill with a fever, her small body shivering violently despite the roaring fire. For 2 days and nights, Clara didn't leave her side. She bathed her forehead, spooned broth between her chapped lips, and sang the old sad lullabies from her own childhood. One night, as Silas stood watching from the doorway, a silent, helpless giant, Rose began to murmur in her delirium. Her words were faint, but they cut through the quiet room like a knife. "Don't let Mama's place stay empty," the little girl whispered, her eyes squeezed shut. "Stay with us, Clara, stay." Clara looked up and met Silas's gaze across the room. His face was a canvas of grief, but something else was there now too. something fragile and new. Hope, he had heard, and the words of his feverish child had given voice to a question that had been hanging between them for weeks. The thaw came, both outside and in. Word of Clara's bravery during the blizzard had spread through the valley. The whispers in town didn't stop, but they changed their tune. Scorn was replaced by a grudging respect. Ranch hands who had once ignored her now tipped their hats. Even Prudence Whitlock was strangely quiet, her lips pursed in a thin line of disapproval, but her venomous words held in check. Spring arrived, and with it a feeling of permanence. Clara planted herbs by the kitchen door. She stitched new curtains, letting the bright spring light flood into the dark corners of the house. She laughed, a sound that felt foreign and wonderful, when Rose insisted on weaving wildflowers into her hair. She was no longer just a resident, she was becoming the heart of the home. Her bond with Silas deepened in the silences. It was in the way he started leaving the warmest chair by the fire for her, the way she made sure the coffee was always hot when he came in from the fields, the way their eyes would meet over Rose's head, sharing a silent smile. But the world outside the ranch hadn't forgotten her arrival. One afternoon, a rider appeared on the horizon, heading not for the main road, but straight for the Callahan Ranch. As he got closer, a cold knot of dread tightened in Clara's stomach. He was a stranger, but he rode with a purpose that felt ominous. He dismounted in the yard. He was handsome in a slick, polished way, with a confident smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm looking for a woman," he said, his gaze sweeping past Silas to land on Clara. "Clara May Dawson. I believe there was a mix-up with her train ticket. I'm Jedediah Kane, the man she came here to marry." The world stopped. The future she had mourned, the man she had cursed, was standing right in front of her. And behind his smile, Clara saw a glint of something possessive, something that made the hair on her arms stand up. He hadn't come to rescue her. He had come to claim her. Silas stepped forward, placing himself between Clara and the stranger. He didn't say a word, but his body was a wall. Jedediah Kane's smile widened, but it was thin and sharp now, like a razor's edge. "My wagon broke down a few miles out of the next county," Jedediah said smoothly, his story rolling off his tongue with practiced ease. "Took a bad fall. I've been laid up for weeks, half out of my mind with worry. I came as soon as I could." He looked directly at Clara, his eyes filled with a performance of deep concern. "I've been searching for you, Clara." Frantically. Clara's mind was reeling. This was the man from the letter, the promise of a respectable life. But standing here now, he felt like a threat. He felt wrong. She looked from his polished boots to Silas's worn, dusty ones, from his easy smile to Silas's grim, protective silence. Rose, who had been playing on the porch, ran and hid behind Clara's skirts, peering out at the newcomer with wide, fearful eyes. "I have our contract," Jedediah continued, pulling a folded document from his coat pocket. "Signed and sealed. She's promised to me." He unfolded it, a legal trap laid bare in the afternoon sun. Then he turned his gaze on Silas, his voice dripping with condescension. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding, a simple act of charity on your part. But it's time for Clara to come with me. You can't keep what's mine." The accusation hung in the air, that Silas had taken her, that he was an opportunist. It was a poisoned dart aimed at his honor. "She can do as she pleases," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. Jedediah laughed, a short, ugly sound. He took a step closer, his charming facade beginning to crack. "Oh, I don't think you understand. I know all about Clara's past, the trouble she was in back east, the reasons she had to leave in such a hurry." He looked at Clara, his eyes cold and hard. "I was willing to give you a clean slate, a fresh start. But it seems you can't help but fall into trouble, can you? I wonder what the good people of this town would think if they knew who you really are." It was a lie. a complete fabrication, but it was a masterful one. He was painting her as a fugitive, a woman with a dark secret, and him as her magnanimous savior. He was trying to isolate her, to make Silas doubt her, to turn the fragile trust they had built into dust. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. This man wouldn't just take her. He would destroy her reputation, and Silas's along with it. Silas didn't even look at Jedediah. His eyes were locked on Clara. He ignored the lies, the threats, the piece of paper. He cut through all of it to the only thing that mattered. "Is this the man you want?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear as a bell. The choice was laid before her. A life with Jedediah, the life she was supposed to have, built on a contract and his veiled threats, or a life here, with this silent, steady man and his daughter, a life built on unspoken feelings and shared hardship. She looked at Jedediah's cruel smile. She looked at Silas's unwavering gaze. She felt Rose's small hand clutching the fabric of her dress. There was no choice at all. "My place is here," Clara said, her voice shaking but firm. Jedediah Kane's face transformed. The charm vanished, replaced by pure, venomous fury. The mask was off. "You'll regret this," he snarled, his eyes burning with hatred. "You'll both regret this." He spun on his heel, mounted his horse, and galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and a toxic promise hanging in the air. He wasn't just leaving. He was declaring war. Jedediah's threat settled over the ranch like a plague. Clara couldn't shake the feeling of dread. He wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. He would go straight to the town. He would find Prudence Whitlock. He would twist his lies into a weapon and aim it right at their hearts. The fragile peace she had found was about to be shattered. Doubt, her old enemy, crept back in. Had she doomed them? By staying, was she bringing ruin to the only home she'd ever known? Silas seemed to sense her turmoil. He didn't speak of it, but he stayed closer. He found reasons to work in the barn instead of the far fields. He would sit on the porch in the evenings, cleaning a rifle, his quiet presence a silent vigil. He was guarding them. He was guarding her. The strain began to show on Rose. She started having nightmares, waking up crying about the bad man. But she was also murmuring something else in her sleep, something that made no sense. "Mama's picture," she'd whimper, "the lady in Mama's picture." One rainy afternoon, Rose's nightmares were so bad that Clara couldn't soothe her. "What picture, sweetie?" Clara asked gently, stroking her hair. "What lady?" Rose's eyes were wide with a strange mix of fear and conviction. She slipped her small hand into Clara's. "I'll show you," she whispered. She led Clara not to the main room, but up the narrow, creaking stairs to the attic, a place filled with forgotten things and the dusty scent of memories. In the corner, under a canvas sheet, sat a small, leather-bound trunk. "Mama's," Rose said simply. Clara's heart pounded. This was sacred ground. Silas had never spoken of his wife's things, had never touched this chest since the day he'd carried it up here. "Are you sure, Rose?" The little girl nodded solemnly. "You have to see." With trembling fingers, Clara lifted the heavy lid. The scent of lavender and old paper drifted out. Inside, preserved perfectly, were the remnants of a life. A wedding dress, yellowed like old cream, a bundle of dried flowers tied with a silk ribbon, and at the bottom a heavy photo album with a mother-of-pearl clasp. Clara lifted it out and sat on the floor, with Rose nestled beside her. She opened it. The first few pages were pictures of a young Silas and a smiling, vibrant woman. Mary Callahan. She was beautiful, with kind eyes and a warmth that seemed to radiate from the faded photograph. Clara's chest ached with a strange jealousy and a profound sadness for the man downstairs. Then they turned a page, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was a photograph of two young women standing side by side, their arms linked. One was unmistakably a younger Mary. The other was her. It was Clara's face staring back at her from across the years. The same eyes, the same mouth, the same fall of chestnut hair. They could have been twins. She stared, utterly stunned, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. This was the source of Rose's dream. This was the lady from the picture. The little girl hadn't imagined her. She had seen her. In her grief, she had prayed for her mother, and a woman with her aunt's face had appeared at the train station like an answer from heaven. Clara carefully took the photograph out. On the back, written in elegant, looping script, were two names: Mary and Lily, sisters forever. Lily, a name she'd never heard, a sister Silas had never mentioned, a face that was her own. The world tilted on its axis. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a chance meeting. This felt like destiny, a thread pulling her across the country to this exact spot, to this exact family. But it opened up a terrifying new set of questions. Who was Lily? And why did Clara have her face? This discovery wasn't an answer. It was a fuse, and it had just been lit. The name echoed in the dusty attic. Lily. Clara gently placed the photograph back in the album, her hands shaking. She looked at Rose, whose expression was calm, as if she had known this all along. Downstairs, she found Silas staring out the kitchen window, his shoulders slumped with worry. She approached him quietly, the photo album held tight against her chest. "Silas," she began, her voice barely a whisper, "we need to talk about Mary." His whole body went rigid. He turned slowly, his eyes falling to the album in her hands. He looked as if he'd seen a ghost. "Rose led me to the attic," she explained softly. "She wanted to show me something." She opened the album to the page with the two women and laid it on the kitchen table. Silas stared at it, his face pale. For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the mantel. "Lily," he finally said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out a calloused finger and traced the face in the photograph, the face that was identical to Clara's. That was Mary's sister, her twin sister. The word hit Clara with the force of a physical blow. Twin. "They were orphans," Silas continued, his gaze lost in the past. "Their parents died in a fire back in Ohio. The girls were sent to different orphanages. Mary was lucky, a family took her in. But Lily, she got lost in the system. Mary spent her whole life looking for her. Wrote letters, sent inquiries, never found her. It was the great sorrow of her life." He looked from the photograph to Clara, his eyes filled with a dawning, impossible understanding. Her full name was Lily Ann Dawson. Dawson. The world went silent. Clara felt the floor drop out from under her. Her name, the name the orphanage had given her. They had told her she was a foundling, left on their doorstep with nothing but a blanket and a name pinned to her clothes. Clara May Dawson. It couldn't be. It was too impossible. "My mother," Clara breathed, the words tasting strange in her mouth. "Lily Dawson was my mother." The truth settled over them, vast and overwhelming. She wasn't a stranger who happened to resemble a photograph. She was family. Mary Callahan was her aunt. Rose was her cousin. This ranch, this home she had fought to earn a place in, was her birthright. She wasn't an intruder in a dead woman's house. She was the last living piece of Mary's own lost family, delivered to her doorstep by a twist of fate so profound it felt like a miracle. But their revelation was short-lived. A storm of a different kind was brewing. Jedediah Kane had done exactly as she'd feared. He had spent 2 days in the Silver Creek saloon, spinning a web of lies. He told everyone that Clara was a woman of low character, a fugitive he had charitably agreed to marry, only to have her stolen by the reclusive rancher Silas Callahan. He painted Silas as a villain, and himself as the victim. And the town, led by the venomous whispers of Prudence Whitlock, was eager to believe the worst. Justice, they muttered over their whiskey, needed to be served. That afternoon, as Silas and Clara were still reeling from the discovery of their connection, a cloud of dust appeared on the road. A posse, at least a dozen men on horseback, riding hard for the ranch. Jedediah Kane was at their head, his face righteous and cruel, and right beside him, Perched on a wagon seat was Prudence Whitlock, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. They were a mob, drunk on self-righteousness and ready to tear their world apart. Silas saw them coming. He moved without a word, taking his rifle down from the wall. He checked the load, his movements calm and deliberate. But as he turned to face the door, Clara put her hand on his arm. "No," she said, her voice steady. "Not with violence." He looked at her, his eyes asking what other way there was. "With the truth," she said. At that moment, as if in a daze, Silas walked over to a small wooden box on the mantel, a box Clara had never seen him open. He lifted the lid and took out a silver locket on a delicate chain. It was worn with age, but clearly cherished. "This was Mary's," he said, his voice rough. "She never, ever took it off. The day she died, she made me promise to keep it safe." He pressed it into Clara's hand. "I think she would have wanted you to have this." Clara's fingers closed around the cool metal. It felt heavy, important. She fumbled with the clasp. It sprang open. On one side was a tiny hand-painted portrait of Mary, smiling her kind smile. Clara braced herself, expecting to see a portrait of Silas on the other side. But it wasn't Silas. It was a tiny, faded photograph of a newborn baby wrapped in a white blanket. Clara's heart stopped. She carefully pried the tiny picture out of its frame. On the back, so small she could barely read it, a single word was engraved into the silver: Clara. The air left her lungs in a rush. It was her. This was her. Her mother, Lily, must have sent it to Mary, the only proof of her daughter's existence. Mary had kept her niece's picture, kept her close to her heart her entire life, never knowing if she was alive or dead. At that exact moment, the thunder of hooves stopped in the yard. "Silas Callahan!" Jedediah's voice boomed. "Come out and face justice! Release the woman you're holding against her will!" The mob roared in agreement. Silas moved toward the door, his rifle held loosely at his side. But Clara stepped in front of him. She held the open locket in her palm, her proof, her shield. She was no longer a frightened orphan. She was a Dawson. She was a Callahan. And this was her home. She walked out onto the porch to face the mob, her head held high, the truth shining in her hand like a star. The afternoon sun was harsh, glinting off the rifle barrels in the crowd. Jedediah Kane sat tall on his horse, a smug, victorious sneer on his face. Prudence Whitlock looked like a vulture about to feast. The rest of the men were a blur of angry, misguided faces. "There she is!" Prudence shrieked, pointing a bony finger. "Look at the shameless hussy, hiding behind a good man's grief." "Let her go, Callahan!" Jedediah shouted, playing his part for the crowd. "Her contract is with me. The law is on my side." Silas stepped out onto the porch to stand beside Clara. He said nothing, his presence a silent, immovable mountain of defiance. Then Clara spoke. Her voice didn't rise to a shout. It was quiet, clear, and carried across the yard with the weight of absolute truth. "My name is Clara May Dawson," she said, her eyes sweeping over the crowd and landing on Jedediah. "And it is true I came here under contract to this man." A murmur went through the mob. Jedediah smiled. "But what he doesn't know," Clara continued, her voice gaining strength, "is that the train didn't bring me to the wrong station. It brought me home." She stepped forward, down the porch steps, until she was standing on the ground before them. She held up the open locket. "The woman who lived here, Mary Callahan, was my aunt." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Prudence Whitlock's jaw dropped. "Her twin sister, Lily Ann Dawson, was my mother," Clara said, her voice ringing with conviction. She held the locket out towards the town's reverend, who had followed the mob out of concern. "My aunt carried this picture of me, her lost niece, in this locket every day of her life. I am not a stranger here. I am blood. This is my family's land. The revelation was a lightning strike, instantly illuminating the truth and exposing Jedediah's lies for the cheap, ugly things they were. The mob's righteous anger dissolved into stunned, shamed silence. The resemblance, Rose's strange dream, Silas's quiet protection, it all clicked into place. Jedediah's face went pale. His plan had crumbled to dust. He was no righteous suitor. He was a con man from the mail-order bride agency. When Clara hadn't shown up at the correct station, a deliberate mix-up he had arranged to trap her, he had written her off. He only came sniffing around when he heard a stray woman had landed herself at the wealthy, widowed Callahan's ranch. He hadn't come for a bride. He'd come for blackmail money. The Reverend Carter dismounted and walked over to Clara, taking the locket and examining it. He looked up, his eyes full of awe and condemnation. He turned to Jedediah. "Deceit has no place in a God-fearing town," he said, his voice booming with authority. Then he turned his gaze on Prudence Whitlock, who looked as if she might faint. "Nor does a venomous and uncharitable tongue. You should be ashamed, madam." Prudence withered under the collective, accusing stare of her neighbors. Her power, built on gossip and suspicion, was broken forever. Jedediah, exposed and defeated, tried to bluster his way out of it. But one look at Silas's cold, deadly, quiet stare was all it took. He yanked his horse's reins, turned, and galloped away, a coward fleeing the truth. The rest of the mob dissolved, the men avoiding each other's eyes, shuffling their feet in the dirt before quietly riding away, leaving a cloud of shame in their wake. The wedding was 2 weeks later. It wasn't the small, humble affair they had first planned. The entire town came, not as judges, but as witnesses to a miracle. They brought pies and fiddles and wildflowers, their offerings a silent apology and a celebration of the family that fate had brought together. Prudence Whitlock was not among them. Clara stood under the budding cottonwood trees, the same trees that had witnessed so much sorrow, and now would witness her joy. Silas stood beside her, his hand holding hers, his silence no longer a wall, but a comfortable, shared language. Rose stood between them, holding both of their hands, her face beaming brighter than the spring sun. As the Reverend spoke the words that would bind them together, Clara looked out over the vast, endless prairie. She was no longer the wrong bride at the wrong station. She was exactly where she was always meant to be. The journey had been brutal, the trials almost unbearable, but every tear, every moment of fear, had led her here, home. For love does not always arrive on the right train or at the expected hour. Sometimes it stumbles in, cold and weary, into the wrong station, only to find the one place, the one person, it was searching for all along. If you believe that everything happens for a reason, and that even the darkest paths can lead to the brightest light, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You never know what story is waiting just down the tracks.